Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. Chapter 13. Virginia Beach. The physical domain of the country had its counterpart in me. The trails I made led outward into the hills and swamps, but they led inward also. And from the study of things underfoot and from reading and thinking came a kind of exploration, myself and the land. In time, the two became one in my mind, with the gathering force of an essential thing realizing itself out of early ground. I faced in myself a passionate and tenacious longing to put away thought forever and all the trouble it brings, all but the nearest desire direct and searching. To take the trail and not look back, whether on foot, on snowshoes, or by sled, into the summer hills and their late freezing shadows. A high blaze, a runner track in the snow would show me where I had gone. Let the rest of mankind find me if it could. John Haynes, from The Stars, the Snow, the Fire, 25 Years in the Northern Wilderness. Two framed photographs occupy the mantel in Corinne McCandless's Virginia Beach home. One of Chris as a junior in high school, the other of Chris as a 7-year-old in a pint-sized suit and a crooked tie, standing beside Corinne, who is wearing a frilly dress and a new Easter hat. What's amazing, says Corinne as she studies these images of her brother, is that even though the pictures were taken 10 years apart, his expression is identical. She's right. In both photos, Chris stares at the lens with the same pensive, recalcitrant squint, as if he'd been interrupted in the middle of an important thought and was annoyed to be wasting his time in front of the camera. His expression is most striking in the Easter photo because it contrasts so strongly with the exuberant grin Corinne wears in the same frame. That's Chris, she says with an affectionate smile, brushing her fingertips across the surface of the image. He'd get that look a lot. Lying on the floor at Corinne's feet is Buckley, the Shetland sheepdog Chris had been so attached to. Now 13 years old, he's gone white in the muzzle and hobbles around with an arthritic limp. When Max, Corinne's 18-month-old Rottweiler, intrudes on Buckley's turf, however, the ailing little dog thinks nothing of confronting the much bigger animal with a loud bark and a flurry of well-placed nips, sending the 130-pound beast scurrying for safety. Chris was crazy about Buck, Corinne says. That summer he disappeared, he wanted to take Buck with him. After he graduated from Emory, he asked Mom and Dad if he could come get Buck, but they said no, because Buckley had just been hit by a car and was still recovering. Now, of course, they second-guess the decision. Even though Buck was really badly hurt, the vet said he'd never walk again after that accident. My parents can't help wondering, and I admit that I can't either, how things might have turned out different if Chris had taken Buck with him. Chris didn't think twice about risking his own life, but he never would have put Buckley in any kind of danger. There's no way he would have taken the same kind of choices if Buck had been with him. Standing 5 feet, 8 inches tall, Corinne McCandless is the same height as her brother was, maybe an inch taller, and looks enough like him that people frequently ask if they were twins. An animated talker, she flips her waist-length hair from her face with a toss of her head as she speaks and chops the air for emphasis with small, expressive hands. She is barefoot. A gold crucifix dangles from her neck. Her neatly pressed jeans have creases down the front. Like Chris, Corinne is energetic and self-assured, a high achiever, quick to state an opinion. Also, like Chris, she clashed fiercely with Walt and Billy as an adolescent, but the differences between the siblings were greater than their similarities. Corinne made peace with her parents shortly after Chris disappeared, and now at the age of 22, she calls their relationship extremely good. She is much more gregarious than Chris was and can't imagine going off in the wilderness, or virtually anywhere else, alone. And although she shares Chris's sense of outrage over racial injustice, Corinne has no objection, moral or otherwise, to wealth. She recently bought an expensive new home and regularly logs 14-hour days at CAR Services Incorporated, the auto repair business she owns with her husband, Chris Fish, in the hopes of making her first million at an early age. I was always getting on Mom and Dad's case because they worked all the time and were never around, she reflects with a self mocking laugh. And now look at me. I'm doing the same thing. Chris, she confesses, used to poke fun at her capitalist zeal by calling her Duchess of York Ivana Trump McCandless, and a rising successor to Leona Helmsley. His criticism of his sister never went beyond good natured ribbing, however. Chris and Corinne were uncommonly close. In a letter delineating his quarrels with Walt and Billy, Chris once wrote to her, "Anyway, I like to talk to you about this because you are the only person in the world who could possibly understand what I'm saying." 10 months after Chris's death, Corinne still grieves deeply for her brother. "I can't seem to get through a day without crying," she says with a look of puzzlement. "For some reason, the worst is when I'm in the car by myself. Not once have I been able to make the 20-minute drive from home to the shop without thinking about Chris and breaking down. I get over it, but when it happens, it's hard." On the evening of September 17, 1992, Corinne was outside giving her Rottweiler a bath when Chris Fish pulled into the driveway. She was surprised he was home so early. Usually, Fish worked late into the night at CAR services. He was acting funny, Corinne recalls. There was a terrible look on his face. He went inside, came back out, and started helping me wash Max. I knew something was wrong then because Fish never washes a dog. "I need to talk to you," Fish said. Corinne followed him into the house, rinsed Max's clothes in the kitchen sink, and went into the living room. Fish was sitting on the couch in the dark with his head down. He looked totally hurt. Trying to joke him out of his mood, I said, "What's wrong with you?" I figured his buddies must have been razzing him at work, maybe telling him they'd seen me out with another guy or something. I laughed and asked, "Have the guys been giving you a hard time?" But he didn't laugh back. When he looked up at me, I saw that his eyes were red. "It's your brother," Fish had said. "They found him. He's dead." Sam, Walt's oldest child, had called Fish at work and given him the news. Corinne's eyes blurred, and she felt the onset of tunnel vision. Involuntarily, she started shaking her head back and forth, back and forth. "No," she corrected him. "Chris isn't dead." Then she began to scream. Her keening was so loud and continuous that Fish worried the neighbors were going to think he was harming her and call the police. Corinne curled up on the couch in the fetal position, wailing without pause. When Fish tried to comfort her, she pushed him away and shrieked at him to leave her alone. She remained hysterical for the next 5 hours, but by 11 o'clock she had calmed sufficiently to throw some clothes into a bag, get into the car with Fish, and let him drive her to Walt and Billy's house in Chesapeake Beach, a 4-hour trip north. On their way out of Virginia Beach, Corinne asked Fish to stop at their church. "I went in and sat at the altar for an hour or so while Fish stayed in the car," Corinne remembers. "I wanted some answers from God, but I didn't get any." Earlier in the evening, Sam had confirmed that the photograph of the unknown hiker faxed down from Alaska was indeed Chris, but the coroner in Fairbanks required Chris's dental records to make a conclusive identification. It took more than a day to compare the x-rays, and Billy refused to look at the fax photo until the dental ID had been completed, and there was no longer any doubt whatsoever that the starved boy found in the bus beside the Shoshana River was her son. The next day, Corinne and Sam flew to Fairbanks to bring home Chris's remains. At the coroner's office, they were given the handful of possessions recovered with the body: Chris's rifle, a pair of binoculars, the fishing rod Ron France had given him, one of the Swiss Army knives Jan Burris had given him, the book of plant lore in which his journal was written, a Minolta camera, and 5 rolls of film, not much else. The coroner passed some papers across her desk. Sam signed them and passed them back. Less than 24 hours after landing in Fairbanks, Corinne and Sam flew on to Anchorage, where Chris's body had been cremated following the autopsy at the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory. The mortuary delivered Chris's ashes to their hotel in a plastic box. "I was surprised how big the box was," Corinne says. "His name was printed wrong. The label said Christopher R. McCandless. His middle initial is really J. It ticked me off that they didn't get it right. I was mad. Then I thought, Chris wouldn't care. He'd think it was funny. They caught a plane for Maryland the next morning. Corrine carried her brother's ashes in her knapsack. During the flight home, Corrine ate every scrap of food the cabin attendant set in front of her, even though, she says, it was that horrible stuff they serve on airplanes. I just couldn't bear the thought of throwing away food since Chris had starved to death. Over the weeks that followed, however, she found that her appetite had vanished. She lost 10 pounds, leading her friends to worry that she was becoming anorectic. Back in Chesapeake Beach, Billy had stopped eating too. A tiny 48-year-old woman with girlish features, she lost 8 pounds before her appetite finally returned. Walt reacted the other way, eating compulsively, and gained 8 pounds. A month later, Billy sits at her dining room table, sifting through the pictorial record of Chris's final days. It is all she can do to force herself to examine the fuzzy snapshots. As she studies the pictures, she breaks down from time to time, weeping as only a mother who has outlived a child can weep, betraying a sense of loss so huge and irreparable that the mind balks at taking its measure. Such bereavement witnessed at close range makes even the most eloquent apologia for high-risk activities ring fatuous and hollow. I just don't understand why you had to take those kind of chances, Billy protests through her tears. I just don't understand it at all.